The sky was smeared in grays and fading gold, the kind of light that makes everything look colder than it is. I sat in the passenger seat of my mother's Jeep Cherokee, wrapped in a threadbare cardigan, fingers tucked under my thighs for warmth. She hadn't turned on the heat, and I didn't ask. I'd already learned to stop asking for comfort. My name is Kaylin, though most people call me Kane. I'm 19, and for the past 7 years, I've lived with partial paralysis in my right leg, the result of a car accident when I was 12. An accident that, according to my mother, ruined everything. She gripped the wheel tight, knuckles white. Her jaw was clenched in that way I knew too well, like she was chewing a grudge she wasn't ready to spit out. I watched her from the corner of my eye, waiting for any sign this trip was more than what it seemed. "Where are we going again?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like I wasn't already bracing for something ugly. She glanced at me once, then back at the road. "It's a surprise," she said flatly. "Trust me." Those two words stuck in my chest like cold gum. Trust me. How many times had she said that before breaking something I couldn't replace? We drove in silence past the last gas station on the outskirts of Louisville. Cell reception weakened as trees swallowed the road. My body started to buzz with anxiety, like my nerves were trying to warn me before my brain caught up. "Mom, I have physical therapy tomorrow," I said carefully. "Remember, Dr. Levine said it's important not to miss physical therapy." She cut me off. "Always more bills, always more appointments. Do you have any idea what your medical expenses have done to this family?" Her words weren't new, but they still cut. Since the accident, I'd become the family burden, the walking reminder of financial strain and interrupted plans. "Mark is talking about leaving me," she continued, referring to my stepfather of 3 years. "Says he didn't sign up for all this chaos, all these expenses." I kept quiet. Mark had never been cruel to me, but he'd never been warm either. Their marriage had been rocky from the start, long before my medical bills became an issue. "If you just tried harder in rehab, maybe you wouldn't need all these appointments," she said, accelerating as the road narrowed. "Other kids recover. Other mothers get to have normal lives." I felt my throat tighten. My mother had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder years ago, but she'd stopped taking her medication, stopped seeing her therapist. When things got bad, like today, she'd find someone to blame. That someone was almost always me. The tires crunched gravel as she turned onto a narrow dirt road hidden between two rows of skeletal trees. There was a small wooden sign, weathered but still legible, "Piney Ridge Trail 2 miles." Not completely abandoned, but isolated enough on a cold weekday afternoon. She stopped the car abruptly, the jolt rocking me forward. Before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, she was already out, walking around to my side. She opened my door and grabbed my arm. "Get out," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, genuine fear creeping into my voice. "I can't do this anymore. Kaylin, I just can't." Her voice cracked, and for a second I thought I saw tears in her eyes. Not sadness, but rage. "Mark says if something doesn't change, he's leaving. And I can't lose him too. Not after your father." She yanked me from the seat. My legs buckled, my right one giving way completely. Pain shot up my spine as I collapsed against the cold ground. "Mom, please," I gasped, trying to pull myself up. "You can't leave me here." She tossed my duffel bag onto the dirt beside me. I hadn't even realized she'd packed it. Had this been her plan all along? "I'll come back when you've learned not to make everything about you," she said through gritted teeth. "When you understand what you've done to this family." "Mom, I have my phone. I'll call for help." I fumbled for my pocket. "Your phone's at 15%, she said coldly. And there's barely any signal out here. By the time anyone comes, maybe you'll understand what it's like to be truly helpless, like I've been since your accident." I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. This wasn't just another explosive episode. This was calculated. "You can't do this," I whispered. "It's freezing. I can't walk properly. This is criminal," she laughed bitterly. "Go ahead. Tell them. Tell them how your poor, mentally ill mother finally snapped after 7 years of caretaking, after your father abandoned us, after everything I've sacrificed." She was already backing away, returning to the driver's side. The engine revved. I tried to crawl toward the car, but my right leg dragged uselessly behind me. "Mom," I screamed, panic rising in my chest. "Please." The brake lights blinked red through the trees like warning flares, and then they vanished. Silence. A phone with dying battery. Weak signal. No wheelchair. Just my bag. A patch of cold forest floor, and me half limping, half crawling, watching dusk bleed into night. I should have panicked more than I did, but something inside me went still, the quiet that comes after years of walking on eggshells. I'd been preparing for this moment without knowing it. My mother had been threatening to get rid of me for years. I just never thought she'd actually do it. I reached into my coat pocket, fingers brushing against the soft folds of a green damask handkerchief, my sister Hannah's, the last thing she gave me before she moved away to college and stopped answering calls. I clutched it, not because it could help me, but because I needed to believe someone once cared enough to leave me something. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet leaves and something sharp, maybe pine, maybe fear. I scanned my surroundings. Trees like prison bars, but just ahead, the dark outline of a small hunter's cabin. Thank God, not completely abandoned in the wilderness. Dragging myself forward, I scraped my palms on bark and dirt. My right leg screamed with each inch, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The temperature was dropping. Not deadly cold, but enough to be dangerous overnight, especially for someone who couldn't move quickly. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the cabin. It was basic weathered wood, a single window, door hanging slightly ajar. I pushed inside, grateful to find it empty of wildlife or other squatters. It wasn't much: a small table, a bench, and an old cast iron stove, long cold, no electricity, no running water, but shelter from the wind. I checked my phone, 12% battery, and one weak bar of signal. I tried calling 911, but the call failed to connect. I sent a text to Creasa, my older sister, hoping it would go through once I had better signal. "Mom left me in Piney Ridge Forest. Need help." I wasn't sure if she'd believe me or even care, but I had to try. I used my bag as a pillow and zipped my jacket tight. The cabin provided shelter, but it was still bitterly cold. My breath came in little clouds, fogging the air. "Please don't let me die out here," I whispered, more to the night than to God. Then, snap, the crack of a twig outside. I froze. Was it an animal or someone watching? I pressed my lips together and waited, heart thumping so hard I thought it might give me away. Another sound, a rustle, then a short, muffled cough. Human, my blood turned to ice water. "Hello," I called, voice cracking. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then the creak of the cabin door opening wider. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the night sky. A man, broad-shouldered, with a backpack. I couldn't make out his face in the darkness. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need help." He didn't speak, not a word. He just stepped inside, set his backpack down, and pulled out a flashlight. In its beam, I could see him better, maybe mid-40s, beard flecked with gray, wearing a weathered jacket and boots. His eyes never quite met mine. He handed me a bottle of water without speaking, then a granola bar. I took both, thirst and hunger overriding caution. "Who are you?" I asked again. "Are you a ranger hunter?" He busied himself gathering kindling from a stack near the stove. Within minutes, he had a small fire going inside it. Warmth slowly began to seep into the cabin. "My name is Park," he finally said, voice low and rough from disuse. "I'm doing research. Plants, birds." His sentences were clipped, uncomfortable. "I'm Kaylin," I said. "My mother. She left me here. I can't walk well. My leg." He nodded, as if this explained everything. Saw the car, heard voices. He pulled a thick wool blanket from his pack and handed it to me. "You'll be warmer now." As the fire's glow illuminated the cabin, I noticed a small notebook fall from my duffel bag. My journal, I'd forgotten I'd packed it. It fell open, pages splayed across the floor. Park glanced at it, then quickly looked away. But I saw recognition in his eyes. "You've read it," I said. Not a question. He looked uncomfortable. "Found it, earlier, by the road. I was going to return it." I should have felt violated, but instead, I felt strangely relieved. Someone had seen, really seen, what my life was like. The pages held everything my mother's mood swings. The gaslighting, the blame, the moments of pure terror when her eyes would go cold. "It's okay," I said softly. "At least someone knows the truth now." As the fire crackled, warming the small space, my mind drifted back to one of the countless moments that had led to this night, and I was 16, standing in our kitchen while my mother held up her purse like a prop in a soap opera. $600, she declared. "Gone." I didn't understand why she was looking at me. "Kaylin, did you take it?" Her voice wasn't soft. It was loud, deliberate. "No," I said quietly. "Of course not." She laughed then, cold and short. "That's funny because no one else has reason to. You've been behind on your physical therapy copays, haven't you?" I said I didn't take it. "Then who?" She looked around like an actress performing to an invisible camera. "It always ends up being you, doesn't it?" Later that night, I'd gone to my room, heart pounding, fists clenched, and that's when I saw her Cresa, slipping a thick envelope into her leather tote. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch. She just smiled and walked out of the house. I said nothing because it didn't matter. They needed me to be the failure. The scapegoat made their reflections a little easier to look at in the mirror. In the cabin, Park's quiet presence pulled me back to the present. He was arranging more wood for the fire, careful to keep it contained. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his words were careful, measured. Everyone deserves warmth. I wanted to ask more, but exhaustion was pulling me under. The last thing I remember before falling asleep was Park placing another log on the fire. His movements almost silent, like a man used to moving through the world without being noticed. Meanwhile, miles away in our two-story home with its polished hardwood floors and overpriced candles, my mother poured herself a glass of wine. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept her composure as she walked into the living room where my stepfather Mark sat watching TV. "Where's Callan?" he asked without looking up. My mother didn't flinch. "She ran off again, said she needed space. You know how she gets." Her tone was casual, practiced, like she was ordering takeout, not rewriting a human being's reality. Mark sighed heavily. "Again, what was it this time?" I tried to talk to her about cutting back on some of her therapies just temporarily. "Until we get the finances sorted out." She flew into a rage. My mother's voice trembled perfectly. She said I never supported her, that I was trying to ruin her life. The usual. Creasa walked in, her nails freshly manicured, scrolling through her phone. Where's Kaylin? Your sister decided to have another one of her episodes, my mother replied. She stormed off. Creasa rolled her eyes. I knew it. She always does this, always has to be the center of attention. And just like that, the lie was folded neatly into the family story. No one questioned it, no one called, no one checked. But across the street, Mrs. Landry, our neighbor for 15 years, watched through her window as my mother's car pulled into the driveway. She'd seen us leave together earlier. Now my mother returned alone. Something felt off. Mrs. Landry had always had a soft spot for me. She'd seen the gradual change in our family dynamics after my accident, how my mother's frustration had curdled into something darker. She considered calling, asking about me, but hesitated. The last time she'd expressed concern, my mother had accused her of interfering, had threatened to report her for harassment. So she watched, and she worried, but she didn't act. Not yet. In another part of town, my cousin River was texting with Creasa. Is Kaylin okay? Mom said Aunt Carol seemed upset earlier. Creasa's reply was dismissive. Drama as usual. She ran off again. River frowned at her phone. She'd seen the dynamics in our family, had witnessed my mother's cruel remarks, the way Creasa enabled her. She'd noticed the change in me too, how I'd grown quieter, how the light in my eyes had dimmed. Did anyone try calling her? River texted back. Why bother? She'll come back when she wants attention again. River set her phone down, uneasy. Something didn't feel right, but she didn't know what to do with that feeling. Not yet. I woke to birdsong and pale morning light filtering through the cabin's dusty window. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why everything hurt. Then it all came flooding back my mother. The forest, park. Park was gone, but he'd left a small pile of supplies on the table, more granola bars, a bottle of water, a box of matches, and a hand-drawn map on a piece of paper torn from his notebook. The map showed the cabin and a path leading to what looked like a road or trail. Next to it was a note in cramped handwriting. Follow this path. 2 miles to main road. We'll check back at noon. I checked my phone 5% battery and still barely any signal. My text to Creasa showed as not delivered. I turned it off to conserve what little power remained. Gingerly, I tested my leg. The cold had made it stiffer than usual, and every movement sent pain shooting up my thigh. Using the wall for support, I managed to stand, though my knee threatened to buckle with each shift of weight. That's when I noticed something else on the table, a walking stick, smoothed and polished, with a comfortable grip at the top. Park must have left it for me. Simple, practical help that acknowledged my disability without pity. I felt tears prick my eyes. As I gathered my things, preparing to follow Park's map, I noticed a notebook wedged in the corner of the cabin. It wasn't mine. The cover was weathered leather, the pages dog-eared, Park's research journal. I knew I shouldn't look, but after he'd read my journal, I felt a strange need to understand who he was. I opened it carefully. Inside were detailed notes about local flora and fauna, sketches of birds, observations about weather patterns. But scattered among the scientific notations were more personal entries. 6th year of solitude, still easier than people. The woods don't lie to you. The birds don't pretend. And then, on a more recent page, saw a mother and daughter arguing by the trailhead. Something familiar in the girl's eyes, the resigned look of someone who's been told they're worthless so many times they've started to believe it. I closed the journal, feeling like I'd glimpsed something private yet profoundly familiar. Park was running from something too. As I made my way outside, using the walking stick for support, something caught my eye, a flutter of paper beneath a pine tree. I limped over and picked it up. A page from my journal, one I'd written years ago about feeling invisible in my own home. But how had it fallen out by the road when my mother pulled me from the car? Had Park found more pages? I looked around and spotted another scrap of paper a few yards away, and another beyond that. A trail of my own words, leading away from the cabin, along the path Park had drawn on his map. Some pages were torn, some were intact. A few had been damaged, scorched around the edges, as if someone had tried to burn them, then changed their mind. Had my mother tried to destroy my journal at some point? Had Park found the discarded pages and kept them? The strangest page was one I found folded neatly beneath a rock. It wasn't from my regular journal, but from a letter I'd written to myself when I was 12. Just after the accident, I'd hidden it in my desk drawer at home. Dear future me, you are not invisible. You matter, even if no one says it. How had this gotten here? The only explanation was that Park had been watching our family for longer than I realized, not in a threatening way, but as a quiet observer who had somehow recognized the dynamics at play. I gathered the pages, tucking them into my bag. Whatever Park's reasons, he seemed to be trying to help in his own way. The path was clear ahead, marked occasionally by another page from my past, leading me forward. The forest path wasn't easy to navigate with my disability, but the walking stick made an enormous difference. I set a slow, steady pace, conserving energy and stopping to rest whenever the pain became too intense. About an hour into my journey, I heard voices ahead, a man and woman talking as they approached on the trail. I felt a surge of relief mixed with caution. "Hello," I called out, my voice stronger than I expected. A middle-aged couple rounded the bend, dressed in hiking gear. They stopped short when they saw me, a disheveled teenager with a walking stick, clearly in distress. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, concern etching her features. I considered my options. I could tell them everything about my mother, the abandonment, Park, but something held me back. If I reported what my mother had done, what would happen? Where would I go? Back to the same house, the same abuse, into a system I'd heard nothing but horror stories about. I got separated from my group. I said instead, "My phone's almost dead, and I'm having trouble walking. Could you point me toward town?" They were immediately helpful, offering water and energy bars. The woman, Susan, was a nurse and checked me for signs of hypothermia or other injuries. "You're lucky," she said. "It got cold last night, but not dangerously so. Are you sure we can't call someone for you or emergency services?" I shook my head. "I just need to get to town. I have people I can contact there." They seemed skeptical but didn't push. Instead, they gave me directions to the nearest town, Maplewood, about a mile further down the trail. They even offered to walk with me, but I declined. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. As I continued alone, the trees gradually thinned, and I began to see signs of civilization, a fence here, a distant rooftop there. Finally, the trail opened onto a paved road with a small sign, "Welcome to Maplewood, Pop 287." It was a quintessential small town, a main street lined with brick buildings, a diner, a hardware store, a small library. People moved about their day, oblivious to the fact that my entire world had shattered less than 24 hours ago. I limped toward the diner, drawn by the warm light inside and the possibility of a phone I could use. That's when I saw them. Through the large front window, I could see my family, my mother, stepfather Mark, Creasa, and my younger brother Tyler sitting in a booth, sharing a meal. They were laughing, actually laughing. My heart stopped. What were they doing here? Then I remembered this was the weekend they were supposed to visit Mark's parents in Cumberland, about 30 miles from Maplewood. They must have stopped here on their way. The coincidence was almost too cruel to believe. They had abandoned me in the woods, and now they were having lunch as if nothing had happened. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching through the glass as my mother reached for the salt, as Creasa scrolled through her phone, as Tyler stole a fry from Mark's plate. No one looked worried. No sign of distress. No evidence they had spent the night searching for their missing daughter and sister. They hadn't reported me missing. They weren't concerned. They had simply erased me from their day, their plans, their lives. And then I saw her River, my cousin, who must have joined them for the weekend trip. Unlike the others, she wasn't smiling. She sat stiffly beside Tyler, barely touching her food. When she glanced up and saw me through the window, her eyes widened, her lips parted in shock. "I'm sorry," she mouthed silently. I turned away before anyone else could see me, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. I stumbled down the sidewalk, using every ounce of strength to put distance between myself and the diner. They hadn't even looked for me. They'd just continued with their weekend plans as if I'd never existed. I don't remember how long I walked, only that eventually I found myself at a small bus shelter on the edge of town, a simple structure with a bench and a roof. I collapsed onto the seat, physically and emotionally exhausted. The reality of my situation crashed over me like a wave. I was effectively homeless, with less than $20 in my wallet, a phone that was nearly dead, and nowhere to go. I couldn't go back home, not after seeing them at the diner, laughing and eating as if they hadn't left me to die. As dusk settled over the town, the temperature began to drop again. I huddled on the bench, trying to conserve body heat. "You okay there, honey?" a deep voice asked. I looked up to see an older man in a bus driver's uniform, kind eyes peering at me from beneath a worn cap. "I'm fine," I said automatically. The lie so familiar it felt like truth. He didn't believe me, that was clear from his expression, but he didn't press. Instead, he reached into a compartment on the bus and pulled out a wool blanket. "Company policy says I gotta have emergency supplies on board," he said, offering me the blanket. "This counts as an emergency, I reckon." I took it with trembling hands. "Thank you. Bus ain't running anymore tonight," he continued, glancing at my walking stick, my disheveled appearance. "But there's a women's shelter 2 blocks that way." He pointed down the street. "They take walk-ins till 9 p.m. I nodded, grateful for the information. "You got someone hitting you?" he asked carefully. "'Cause they can help with that too." "It's complicated," I said quietly. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Usually is." "You need me to walk you there?" "No, I can manage. Thank you for the blanket." "Keep it," he said, already turning back to his bus. "And honey, whatever's happening, it ain't your fault. Remember that." I watched him drive away, his tail lights disappearing around a corner. His simple kindness had unlocked something in me, not quite hope, but a flicker of possibility. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't include going back. I made my way to the shelter, a modest brick building with a discreet sign, "New Beginnings Women's Resource Center." Inside, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair greeted me from behind a desk. "I need a place to stay," I said, hating how my voice cracked. She didn't ask questions, just nodded and started the intake process. I gave a false last name Parker instead of Halverson and said I was 20 instead of 19. Small lies, protective ones. "Medical conditions we should know about?" she asked gently. "Partial paralysis in my right leg." I said, "From an old injury." She noted it without comment. "We have a room available. It's small, but it's private. Bathrooms shared. Meals are at 7 noon and 6. There's no curfew, but doors lock at 10 p.m. You'll get a key card. How long can I stay? I asked. Up to 30 days for emergency housing. After that, we can talk about transitional options if you need them. 30 days. A month to figure out what came next. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, in a narrow bed with sheets that smelled of industrial detergent, I stared at the ceiling and remembered another time my words had been twisted against me. I had come home from physical therapy to find my old journal lying open on the kitchen table. Cresa was reading it aloud. Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into a void and no one in this house hears me. She'd use this exaggerated, whispery voice like a tragic actress. Everyone laughed, even Uncle Barry, who used to sneak me candy during card games. Kalen the poet, he chuckled. So dramatic. I remembered standing there frozen. I had poured my heart into that journal. It was never meant for their eyes, especially not for their entertainment. Cresa had turned one last page and smirked. I just want Mom to see me, too. Her voice dripped with mockery. I'd snatched the notebook from her hands, but the damage was done. That was the night I'd stop writing at least where they could find it. In the shelter room, I pulled out the pages I'd collected from the forest path. How had Park found them? How long had he been watching over me from a distance? I fell asleep clutching those fragments of my past. Proof that my reality hadn't been a lie, that someone had seen the truth all along. Morning brought a strange sense of calm. I had slept better than expected, perhaps because for the first time in years, I didn't have to brace myself for what mood my mother might be in when I woke. After a simple breakfast in the shelter's communal kitchen, I met with a social worker named Elaine. She was straightforward but kind, outlining resources available to me, medical assistance, job training, housing options. Is there anyone you want to contact? She asked. Family or friends who might be worried about you. I thought about River, the only one who had seemed concerned, but contacting her meant risking my mother finding out where I was. No, I said firmly. There's no one. Afterward, I ventured into town. I needed to orient myself, to see what possibilities existed in this small community where I'd unexpectedly found myself. Maplewood was bigger than it had first appeared. Beyond the main street were neighborhoods, schools, a community college. As I walked, I found myself drawn to a narrow brick building with tall windows and a hand-painted sign, The Bookmark. It was a used bookstore, the kind with floor-to-ceiling shelves and that wonderful smell of old paper and binding glue. I stepped inside, seeking refuge in the familiar comfort of books. An elderly man looked up from behind the counter. "Morning," he greeted, setting aside his crossword puzzle. "Just browsing." "Yes," I said, "just looking around." He nodded and returned to his puzzle, allowing me the privacy to explore. I wandered through the stacks, running my fingers along spines, breathing in the scent of stories. When I returned to the front, the man was watching me with an odd expression. "You're not from here," he said. It wasn't a question. "Just passing through," I replied carefully. "Hmm." He studied me, then tilted his head. "You remind me of someone." "You're not related to Daniel Hayes, are you?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Daniel Hayes was my father's name. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. Why do you ask?" My voice trembled. The man's eyes widened slightly. "You're Kaylin, aren't you Daniel's daughter?" I took a step back, suddenly afraid. How did this stranger know me? "It's all right," he said quickly. Seeing my panic, "I'm Edward. Your father and I were friends in college. He used to come through town sometimes, on his way to Louisville." "My father left when I was 9, I said cautiously. I haven't seen him since. Edward's expression softened with something like sadness. Is that what Carol told you? My mother? I corrected automatically. And yes, he abandoned us. Oh, child. Edward sighed. That's not what happened at all. He disappeared into a back room, returning with a battered parcel wrapped in brown paper. Daniel brought this years ago. Asked me to hold on to it, in case you ever came looking for him. I'm not looking for him, I said, even as my hands reached for the package. Maybe not, Edward replied gently, but here you are all the same. I sat on a stool by the window, carefully unwrapping the parcel. Inside was a leather-bound journal, similar to the one I'd kept but older, more worn. I opened it with trembling fingers. Kaylin, the first page read, "If you're reading this, then I hope you found your way back to yourself. They took so much from me, from us. I tried to fight. I tried to reach you. I hope this is how I finally do." I turned the pages slowly, tears blurring my vision. Letters to me on my birthdays. Court transcripts showing how my mother had filed false domestic violence claims to get sole custody. Records of child support payments. Phone logs of calls that were never answered. One entry stopped me cold. Court denied my visitation appeal again today. Carol's testimony about my instability was convincing. She's being awarded a restraining order. I can't come within 500 feet of the house of Kaylin without risking arrest. She's being hidden from me. Carol says she's not ready, but Kaylin deserves more than silence. My father hadn't abandoned us. He'd been forced away, systematically removed from my life by my mother's manipulations. He tried to find you, Edward said quietly. For years, even after he moved to Oregon, he'd stop here whenever he was back east, asking if I'd heard anything, leaving updated contact information in case you ever came by. Where is he now? I whispered. Still in Portland, last I heard, teaching literature at a community college. I clutched the journal to my chest, overwhelmed by this revelation. Another lie, another manipulation, another piece of my life distorted by my mother's need for control. I hesitated. Could I use your phone to call him? Edward smiled. Of course. Take all the time you need. I didn't call my father that day, or the next. I needed time to process everything I'd learned, to decide what I wanted my next steps to be. Instead, I focused on building a foundation in Maplewood. The women's shelter connected me with a part-time job at a local print shop. The owner, Maggie, needed someone to handle the front desk a few hours a day, answering phones, greeting customers, basic computer work. It wasn't much, but it was income, and Maggie didn't mind my disability. We all have our challenges, she said simply when I explained my limitations. The shop's all on one level, and you'll have a chair. Just let me know if you need anything else. Meanwhile, Elaine, the social worker, helped me apply for emergency medical assistance to continue my physical therapy. She also connected me with a counselor who specialized in family trauma. What your mother did was abandonment and endangerment. Dr. Chen told me in our first session, it's normal to feel confused, to question whether you deserved it. Part of me still wants to go back, I admitted, to pretend it never happened. That's the trauma bond talking, she explained. Breaking free from abusive relationships isn't a single decision. It's a process of daily choices. Weeks passed. My temporary stay at the shelter extended as I moved into their transitional housing program. I saved every penny from my print shop job, opened my own bank account, and began to build a life independent from my family's influence. I also went looking for Park. I owed him my thanks, possibly my life. A local ranger pointed me toward a small cabin deeper in the forest, well off the main trails. Odd fellow, the ranger said. Been living out there for years. Comes into town for supplies once a month. Keeps to himself otherwise. Some kind of naturalist. Writes for science journals. I hiked out to the cabin one Saturday, my walking much improved after resuming regular physical therapy. The forest felt different now, less threatening, more peaceful. When I reached Park's cabin, I found him outside, sketching a bird perched on a nearby branch. He looked up as I approached, surprise and then recognition crossing his weathered face. "You came back," he said simply. "I wanted to thank you." I replied, "You helped me when no one else would." He nodded, setting his sketchbook aside. "You found your way because of you." I held out the walking stick he'd given me. This made all the difference. "Keep it," he said. "It suits you." We sat on his porch, sharing a simple lunch of apples and cheese. Park wasn't much for conversation, but in his spare words, I learned his story. He'd been a professor once, before social anxiety and a breakdown had driven him to seek solitude. The woods had been his healing place. "I recognized something in you," he admitted quietly. The look of someone who'd been told they were worthless so many times, they started to believe it. "You saved those pages from my journal," I said. "How?" "Found them by the road after your mother's car left. Some were scattered. Some were bundled together, looked like someone had tried to burn them but didn't finish. I kept them, thought they might be important to someone." "They were important to me," I said softly. "They still are." Before I left, Park gave me a small wooden carving of a bird taking flight. "Reminder," he said, "even with broken wings, there's still sky." I visited him occasionally after that, bringing books or supplies from town. We developed an unusual friendship, two wounded souls, finding comfort in quiet understanding. 4 months after my mother abandoned me, I moved into my own studio apartment above a bakery in downtown Maplewood. It was tiny, but mine paid for with my now full-time salary from the print shop, where Maggie had promoted me to design assistant after discovering my artistic abilities. I had started painting again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. My subjects were abstract at first, swirls of color expressing emotions I couldn't yet name. But gradually, more concrete images emerged: a girl behind glass, hands pressed against the transparent barrier, a bird with one broken wing, a room with no doors. Dr. Chen encouraged this expression. "Art can access trauma memories in ways talking sometimes can't," she explained. One afternoon, while helping Edward reorganize the poetry section at the bookmark, I discovered a flyer for an upcoming exhibition at the Maplewood Gallery. Unseen and anonymous exhibition of emerging artists. The premise was simple. Artists could submit work without their names attached. The pieces would be displayed and judged solely on their merit, with identities revealed only at the closing reception. Something about the anonymity appealed to me. I could tell my story without immediately claiming it a safe first step into vulnerability. I worked for weeks on a single painting, pouring every memory, every emotion into it. The result was a large canvas I titled "The Forgotten Room." It depicted a girl trapped behind a glass wall, mouth open in a silent scream, while a family sat at a table just beyond, laughing and eating as if she didn't exist. The glass wall was cracking in one corner, a small spiderweb of fractures spreading. When I delivered it to the gallery, wrapped carefully in brown paper, my hands were shaking. The gallery director, Marcus, asked no questions beyond the title and medium information for the display card. The exhibition opened on a Friday evening in October. I attended quietly, blending into the crowd, watching as strangers stopped before my painting. Some moved on quickly, uncomfortable with its raw emotion. Others stood transfixed, faces reflecting recognition of a truth they perhaps knew too well. I was about to leave when a familiar voice froze me in place. This one's disturbing, feels a bit melodramatic, don't you think? My mother stood before my painting, wine glass in hand, head tilted critically. Beside her, Creasa nodded in agreement. They were dressed for an evening out, my mother in her signature ivory wrap, Creasa in something fashionably black. My heart hammered against my ribs. What were they doing here? Then I remembered Creasa had majored in art history. She worked for a gallery in Louisville. Of course, she would attend exhibitions in neighboring towns. They didn't see me, standing half hidden behind a column. I watched as they made their way around the room, judging each piece with casual disdain, never suspecting that one of them had been created by the daughter they'd discarded. I considered slipping out, avoiding confrontation. But something kept me rooted in place, perhaps the same something that had helped me survive that night in the forest. I wasn't running anymore. The gallery director tapped a glass for attention. "Thank you, everyone, for coming to this year's Unseen Showcase," Marcus said. "As you know, this exhibition is unique because the artists have remained anonymous until tonight. Now we'll reveal the names behind each powerful work." He moved around the room, announcing names to polite applause. Each reveal brought smiles, congratulations, photographs. Then he stopped at my painting. "And this," he said, "The Forgotten Room is by Kaylin Halverson." There was a silence so thick the air seemed to solidify. Then a sharp sound glass hitting the floor. Creasa's wine glass shattered, red liquid pooling like blood at her feet. My mother's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. I stepped out from behind the column, meeting her gaze directly for the first time in months. "You told me no one would ever listen to my story," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Tonight they stared at it for 20 minutes, and not one of them looked away. Murmurs swept the room. People glanced between us, sensing the drama unfolding, but not understanding its depth. My mother recovered quickly, her shock transforming into something calculated. "Kaylin," she said, her voice honeyed with false concern. "We've been so worried. Where have you been? We've looked everywhere." The lie was so brazen, so absolute, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory. But then I thought of Park, of the pages he'd saved, of my father's journal. I wasn't alone in my truth anymore. "No," I said simply. "You haven't." Creasa stepped forward, eyes pleading. "Kaylin, Mom's been sick with worry. We filed a police report." "Stop." I cut her off. "Just stop. I saw you all the next day, at the diner in town, laughing, eating, not looking for anyone." My mother's face hardened, the mask of concern falling away. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic," she hissed, low enough that only those closest could hear. "Running away, then painting this distortion to embarrass your family." "I didn't run anywhere," I replied evenly. "You know exactly where you left me." People were openly staring now. Marcus looked bewildered, sensing he'd inadvertently uncovered something explosive. "We're leaving," my mother announced, grabbing Creasa's arm. "Clearly, Kaylin is still working through some issues. We'll talk about this at home." "No," I said again, stronger this time. "We won't. I don't live with you anymore. I don't need to." She stared at me, genuine confusion breaking through her facade. For the first time in my life, I realized she truly couldn't comprehend my independence. In her mind, I would always come back, always submit, always need her. "This isn't over," she warned, backing away. "You're right," I agreed. "It's just beginning." I didn't stay to hear her response. I turned and walked out, my walking stick tapping softly against the polished floor, step by step, until the doors closed behind me. The confrontation at the gallery changed everything and nothing. I continued my quiet life in Maplewood, working at the print shop, painting, healing, but now I was visible in a way I hadn't been before. The local newspaper ran a small article about the exhibition, mentioning the powerful emotion of my piece. Someone posted a photo of the forgotten room on social media, and it began circulating among art students and therapy groups. 3 days after the exhibition, I received a call from the police department. Someone I suspected Mrs. Landry, our old neighbor, had finally reported my mother for abandonment and endangerment. A detective wanted to take my statement. I told them everything: the drive to the forest, being pulled from the car, the night in the cold, finding Park, seeing my family at the diner the next day. I showed them my father's journal as evidence of my mother's pattern of manipulation and control. "We'll need to investigate further," the detective said. "But this is serious. There could be charges." Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt hollow. Criminal charges wouldn't heal what had been broken, wouldn't erase years of psychological abuse. That evening, my phone rang again. A Louisville number I didn't recognize. Kaylin. The voice was familiar yet strange. "River, I hadn't spoken to my cousin since that day at the diner." "Yes, it's me." She sounded nervous. I I need to tell you something. About that day. When Aunt Carol left you." My grip tightened on the phone. "What about it?" "I heard her planning something," River confessed, her words tumbling out. "The day before, she was talking to Creasa. She said she needed to teach you a lesson, that you were ruining everything. I didn't know what she meant. I should have warned you. I should have done something." "Why didn't you?" I asked, my voice hollow. "I was scared," she admitted. "You know how Aunt Carol is, how she twists things. And then when you disappeared, she told everyone you'd run away after a fight. She seemed so convinced. I almost believed her myself, until I saw you outside the diner. Your face, you looked so betrayed." "I was," I said simply. "The police called me today," River continued. "Asked me what I knew. I told them everything this time." She paused. "I'm sorry, Kaylin. I was a coward." After we hung up, I sat by my window watching dusk settle over Maplewood. River's admission didn't change what had happened, but it confirmed what I'd always suspected: my mother's actions weren't impulsive. They were calculated. The next week brought a flurry of consequences. My mother and Creasa both called repeatedly, alternating between threats and tearful pleas. My mother insisted she'd only meant to scare me, that she'd planned to return shortly but got lost. When that didn't work, she claimed temporary insanity, stress, medication issues, anything to avoid responsibility. I didn't engage. Dr. Chen had warned me about this: the desperate attempts to regain control once an abuser realizes their victim has truly escaped. The district attorney decided to pursue charges: child endangerment, abandonment, and falsifying a police report for claiming I'd run away. My mother hired an expensive lawyer and began a campaign to paint herself as the victim of a troubled daughter's vindictive lies. Some family members chose sides. Uncle Barry called to tell me I was tearing the family apart. Aunt Lucille sent a carefully worded email suggesting I should consider forgiveness and keep family matters private. But there were surprises too. Tyler, my younger brother, sent a simple text: "I believe you." Mrs. Landry came forward with years of observations about my mother's treatment of me, and an old high school teacher contacted the police to report concerns she'd had about my home situation years ago. The walls of silence were crumbling, one truth at a time. As autumn deepened into winter, my life developed a rhythm disconnected from the legal proceedings against my mother. The preliminary hearings would take months, with a trial potentially a year away. I couldn't put my healing on hold waiting for justice that might never fully come. I started sculpting in addition to painting, finding satisfaction in the tactile nature of clay. My first completed piece was a phoenix rising from ashes, one wing cracked but healing. I glazed it in whites and golds, leaving the fracture visible, a scar transformed into something beautiful. The local arts center invited me to display my work in their winter showcase. This time, I proudly signed my name to each piece. No more hiding, no more shame. It was after this exhibition that I received an email that would change my path once again. Ms. Halverson, my name is Elena Vasquez from the Oregon Youth Arts Healing Project. Your work, The Forgotten Room, was shared in one of our support groups for teens from abusive homes. The impact was immediate and profound. Several participants asked if you might consider speaking with our group about the healing power of artistic expression. We would cover all expenses for a visit to Portland. Please consider this invitation. Your voice matters. Portland, where my father lived. The synchronicity wasn't lost on me. After careful consideration and many conversations with Dr. Ju Chen, I decided to accept, not just to speak to the youth group, but to finally meet my father. Our first phone call was awkward, emotional, filled with long pauses and sudden tears. I never stopped looking for you, he said, his voice breaking. I never stopped loving you. I thought you abandoned us, I admitted. That's what she told me. I know, he sighed. It's what she told everyone. When I finally flew to Portland in early spring, I was a bundle of nerves. What if we had nothing in common? What if the reality of him couldn't match the father I'd imagined from his journal? He was waiting at the airport, taller than I remembered, hair grayer, face lined but kind. He hesitated before embracing me, unsure of my boundaries, but when we hugged, something locked into place. A missing piece returned. The week in Portland was transformative. I met my stepmother Linda and their two children, half siblings I hadn't known existed. I toured the community college where my father taught literature, and I spoke to the youth group, sharing my journey from silence to expression. One girl, maybe 13, sat in the back row, drawing furiously throughout my talk. Afterward, she approached shyly and handed me her sketch, a girl emerging from a glass box, arms outstretched toward light. That's how your painting made me feel, she whispered. Like maybe I could break out too. I knelt beside her chair. You can, I promised. It's hard and it hurts, but you can. On my last night in Portland, my father and I sat on his porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. I've been thinking about your mother, he said carefully, about why she became the person she did. I tensed slightly. Are you going to tell me to forgive her? No. He shook his head firmly. What she did is unforgivable, but understanding can sometimes help with healing, even when forgiveness isn't possible. And he told me things I hadn't known: how my mother's own parents had been coldly critical, emotionally unavailable, how she'd suffered a severe postpartum depression after Creasa was born, never fully treated, how she'd always feared abandonment, ironically becoming the very thing she feared most. It doesn't excuse anything, he emphasized, but sometimes monsters are made, not born. I thought about this on the flight back to Kentucky. My mother was both perpetrator and victim, a link in a chain of trauma that stretched back generations. I couldn't forgive her, but I could choose to break the chain, to heal differently, to be different. 1 year after my mother abandoned me in the woods, I stood in the Maplewood Gallery beside my newest installation, a series called Emergence. The centerpiece was a life-sized sculpture of a girl stepping out of a cracked glass box, reaching toward a sky filled with birds. The exhibition had drawn a substantial crowd, including a critic from a respected arts journal. My work was being recognized not just for its emotional impact, but for its technical skill as well. As I spoke with gallery visitors, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Park standing awkwardly in a clean but clearly uncomfortable button-down shirt, looking out of place among the wine-sipping art patrons. "You came," I said, genuinely touched. He rarely left his forest sanctuary, especially not for social events. "Important day," he replied with his characteristic brevity. "Couldn't miss it." Later, as the crowd thinned, I found a quiet moment to reflect on the journey that had brought me here, from that cold night in the forest to this warm gallery space, from silenced victim to artist with a voice. The legal case against my mother had concluded with a plea deal, probation, mandatory therapy, and a restraining order preventing her from contacting me. It wasn't the justice I'd imagined, but perhaps it was the most realistic outcome. Creasa had stood by our mother throughout, increasingly bitter as her own life unraveled in the scandal. River had made amends in her own way, providing crucial testimony and later reconnecting with me through occasional texts and calls. Adam. Tyler, now living with my father during school breaks, was slowly healing from his own experience in that toxic household. As for me, I had received an offer to join the Oregon Youth Arts Healing Project as a permanent instructor. In 2 weeks, I would be moving to Portland, starting a new chapter near my father and far from the shadows of my past. I didn't need my mother's apology anymore. I didn't need Creasa's acknowledgement or the validation of extended family who had looked away for years. I had found my own truth, my own voice, my own path to healing. That evening, I wrote one final entry in the journal my father had left for me. Sometimes the people who silence us the most are the ones meant to love us loudest. But our stories don't end with their failures. They begin with our decision to speak anyway. I thought of the bus driver who had given me a blanket on my darkest night, of Edward, who had kept my father's journal for years, waiting for me to find it, of Park, who had seen my pain and responded with simple, life-saving kindness, of Dr. Chin and Maggie and Marcus and all the others who had helped me build a new life. And I thought of the girl in Portland, clutching her drawing of escape. Perhaps someday she would tell her own story, would help someone else find their voice. Perhaps that was how healing truly worked, not in circles, but in ever-widening ripples. I closed the journal and looked out at the sculpture of the girl emerging from her glass prison. She wasn't me, not anymore. I had already emerged. I had already found my way into open air. My mother had abandoned me in those woods, believing I would break. Instead, I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, stronger at the broken places. As I left the gallery that night, walking steadily with the stick Park had carved for me all those months ago, I realized a profound truth. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with an apology. It begins the moment we stop waiting for one, and in that moment, we become free.